Hello, hello, hello.
Morning, Jason.
It is morning. This is a new world for us.
Yeah, can you tell we're a little bit groggy?
Yeah,
Yeah,
groggy.
we usually record afternoons?
Typically, or like late morning.
Yeah,
I usually don't have a cup of coffee in my hand.
yeah, yeah. I'm usually a little bit more awake, but it is how it is. How's the new one on the way?
Man, just waiting.
Just teasing.
Yeah. Sunday, what's today? Today's Friday, so Sunday, uh, she was like having contractions like 3 minutes apart. And we're like, oh no, this is it. And then they stopped. So
Yeah.
figured it out.
Well, what you been up to this week? Any interesting Ruby Rails stuff?
I've been working on bugs, which is
Okay,
like what's the word I'm looking for? It's
your favorite.
yeah, favorite was the word I was going for. Uh, it's been all right. If there's like, I read a DHH post one time where he was like, I enjoy bugs. Essentially, like he said, if I remember correctly, it was years ago. I read this like he enjoys the challenge, and I'm like, nah.
Well, that's interesting. Because last night I was helping a guy in the Go Rails Slack, and there was something. Let's see, what was it? He was having trouble with Action Cable, um, and he's running it on Windows, which was kind of there's likely some issue related to that. And he's using the WSL thing, like the Linux subsystem for Windows. Um, and Action Cable would crash whenever he would go to open up a chat room in the code he was working on. And I was like, that seems weird. And the funny thing was, like, we eventually get set up to do a little pair programming in Visual Studio Code, and I'm like starting the Rails server, and it's like, okay, well, you do whatever you need to do to crash it so I can see what happens. And you know, I was like, this is going to be weird trying to debug this. And then, like, I get an error from Redis, and it's like, some, it was not a connection not found error, but it seemed close enough. And I was like, is your Redis server running? And he's like, oh, do we have to install Redis? And I was like,
Oh
oh.
no.
But it was funny because, like, I'm used to, and I'm sure we all are, like, used to, you know, um, those Postgres errors as like very descriptive of like we couldn't connect to the socket or whatever. Is Postgres running? And it like asks you that in the error message. But this was just like, yeah, there's some non-blocking thing that crashed and whatever. And so I'm sure it's something to do with like the connection or networking stuff they wrote in their WSL for Windows thing. But it brought up like that sort of debugging stuff of like, okay, well, you're going to be forced when you're fixing these bugs, like to think out all these extra things and figure out what assumptions you made that were wrong. And that's kind of, I find that kind of fun, because that one was like, I just assumed he had Redis running and knew what Redis was. But of course, that wasn't actually the case. And then I was like, actually, I make that assumption and probably need to step back and like make sure that I explain what Redis is and why we're using it more. Because he watched like the chat room episode on Go Rails, um, and I'm sure I mentioned Redis, but I probably didn't be like, oh, it's like another database that has to run outside of Rails.
Right.
Right.
Way to misguide an entire community, Chris.
Dude, I know. um,
No. So the one thing I will say is that there is an immense like joy when you solve a bug, but
yeah.
at the same time, I always feel so dirty after I solve bugs because I feel like usually the bugs I have are like in production, and so it's like got to get something out quick, and then I regret everything I've done.
Yeah, why is that? Why do you feel that way? Because I feel the same way, unless, um, I don't know, because sometimes, like, when I see a bug in production, I'll write a test for it, reproduce it locally, and then when I get it fixed, I feel pretty good if I do that process, and I'm like, man, this will never happen again. Like, we'll never see these issues again. Um, but then there's the other 75% of bugs where you're like, okay, I'm just going to patch it with no tests and hope this covers everything.
Yeah, the thing that would probably like mitigate that is get like a patch out and then go back and like clean that up. But most of the time, I like when a bug comes up, like I'm working on a completely like different area. And
Mm,
so like usually I just want to patch that bug and get back to like what I was working on. So it's probably just like a self-discipline thing for me.
like a distraction because it's taking you away from your main train of thinking or whatever when you're working on something else and you're going to put out fires.
Yeah, it's a context switch and then uh
Do you put on your fireman hat when you go fix bugs like that?
yeah, I go and then I go to Firehouse Subs for lunch.
Perfect.
So I have two things that came to mind when you were talking. The first is that 2 episodes ago, I told you I was bragging about how cool I think the Surface Go is,
Yeah, yeah.
and I was like, man, this will like I'm gonna install this. I'm gonna install Windows and give it a shot. So I like downloaded Parallels. I think is what it was, one of those two, and I installed it, and then I got the subsystem installed for Linux. And then after about an hour, okay, so that took about an hour to get set up. And then an hour later, I couldn't do anything. Like, I just felt like in Talladega Nights when Will Ferrell's character, Ricky Bobby, is getting interviewed and he's like, I don't know what to do with my hands. And he's just like, hold him in front of his body. That's how I felt.
That's hilarious.
Uh,
Um, so were you having trouble like getting your tools installed, or what was like the frustrating part there?
it was tools mostly. I can't remember. It was a couple weeks ago, so I don't remember what exactly it was. Um,
Because I
my
know
kid,
that.
my kid is screaming. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all right. Yeah, I know that like, it's not a real Linux operating system. So like some stuff doesn't work and it's better for you to install like Postgres on Windows and then connect to it over a socket from Rails inside Ubuntu. But yeah, there's
I
like,
didn't even get that far. I didn't even get to Postgres.
oh, okay. Because like last night we were at that point of like, oh, Redis isn't installed. How do we install it on Windows? Because Postgres is recommended to be on running on Windows, but there's like the Postgres.app thing, which I think supports Windows, or there's easy ways to install Postgres at least on Windows. There's not for Redis, I don't think. So we ended up trying to install Redis on the Windows subsystem, and then it was like, um, it doesn't implement the dbus stuff, I think. And so if you tried to run system control stuff, which just monitors and makes sure that Postgres, if it dies, it gets restarted, or Nginx or Redis or whatever, that doesn't really work on there. And as far as I could tell, because it's not a real operating system. And so we were like, oh, you may just have to run the Redis server manually instead of having it always running in the background. So there's little things like that I mean, they could use Foreman to start it up as well, but or even just use the I've never used this, but the Postgres PubSub functionality can actually power Action Cable, which is pretty cool. So you
Oh,
can
that's awesome.
one database and have all your records and your chat messages run through there, which is cool.
Yeah, the thing that like made me just like shut it down and completely like erase everything I had done all morning was that before we recorded the podcast that morning, I downloaded a copy of Windows 10,
Uh huh.
and so when I fired up Parallels, it's like, oh, we'll actually just install Windows 10 for you. Like, you don't need to use your download of it. And I was like, great. And then it gave me this like bootleg version. So like I didn't even get like a 30-day trial of Windows. And with Windows 10, if you don't have a license, it just won't let you do certain things. Like it just locks you out. It's like, oh, you need a license to do that.
Huh.
Like things even like changing your background. And so
Oh, right.
it was like, okay, well, I'll buy a copy of Windows 10. It was like $100 and something bucks. I was like, I'm done. And just counted my losses.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna make a joke that, when you shut it down and gave up, that you had to wait to shut down and install updates for 30 minutes before you give up.
Oh,
Man, yeah, that I installed a dual boot of Windows on my Hackintosh, and like, it I just remember like, okay, installing Windows, that installed pretty quickly. And then I waited an hour or two for updates to install, and then, I'd shut it down and it wanted to install more updates, and I was just like, oh, so this hasn't changed at all since Windows, ME or whatever. And I was like, man, I don't really miss this. And I I don't even really boot into it. I was going to do it to play games, but like, I don't even want to bother because I'll spend an hour installing updates and not be able to just jump in and play games.
yep. Yeah, the other thing you were talking about Redis. I did a fun thing at work with Redis. So by fun, like everybody listening will probably be like, yeah, I've done that before. But my Redis experience in X number of years I've been programming has been limited to caching, Sidekick. Those are like the two things I use Redis for.
So sort of you use other libraries that happen to use Redis, but you weren't using it directly.
Right. So we had a situation at work where I needed to like see if something had been done. So my first thought was like, well, I'll just put a timestamp on the database, like sent at or whatever. And so then I was like, but my hesitation is always like, do we need another database column, right?
You always need it. Infinite columns.
Right. I mean, what are databases for if not just a dumping ground?
Yeah.
And so
you could just what if you just made a JSON column and you just stuck a bunch of random crap in there? That sounds like good design, right?
That's the future.
Sorry. Anyways.
No, you're good. So, but the problem is like, I only need this column for like.
You hear my cat in the background. He brings me this toy every morning and every night, and meows the whole time he brings it to me.
It's better than a snake.
Yeah. That's not a snake this time, thankfully. Baby snake. Oh my god. I won't be able to sleep again tonight if I think about that.
Where was I? Oh, so I only need this column for like 15 minutes, really. So I was like, this is overkill. So I was like, this is a good case for Redis. So literally all I do is like make a key and don't even have a value. But essentially I just use that. I just look at Redis and say, if this key exists, don't do this thing. And then, well, actually it's the inverse of that because otherwise we have a ton of keys. So essentially I create a key, and if it's present, then I do the thing. If it's not, I don't do the thing.
Does it allow you to have nil values?
I just said it's like true, like
Yeah.
just some BS. But yeah,
you don't need the value, but you have to have a value to set the key, right?
Right. So it's like an extra like 4 or 5 lines of code, no database column, and short-lived Redis keys. And that was me working with our CTO. I was like, I thought about doing this for Redis. I don't know. And he's like, well, actually, you could do that. And so it was fun. I felt like, hey, I had a valid like Redis use case for the first time in my career. So
yeah, I mean, that's more or less that's exactly what Sidekick does internally. You add a job, it adds a key, and it searches those keys, and then if it exists, then it runs the job whenever it can, and then gets rid of it when it's done. So they're kind of
shout out global IDs and Rails.
yeah, those are cool. I have Sidekick of course doesn't require Rails obviously, so they still encourage passing actual database or record IDs and look them up, but that transparency from Rails, just give it an object, we'll serialize it and deserialize it and check and make sure it still exists when the job runs is pretty sweet. I like that.
Yeah, so I haven't used it much. Once again, Jamie at Podia was the one who was telling me about it. But for those who don't know what it is, it's a part of Rails. Is it a part of Active Record or just Rails?
I don't remember because it sort of spans Active Job and Active Record.
Yeah, I guess it really doesn't matter. But essentially, when you have a model that's like database backed, or I assume is database backed, for my purpose, it's database backed. You have a record of that model. You can call to global ID, and it gives you like this unique identifier that Rails understands, and it's like if I instantiate the record in one place and call to global ID, and then do it another place and call to global ID, they match. Is that right?
Yeah, because it's just I think by default the like format for the ID is like your app name, the model name, and the ID separated by slashes, like a URL.
Yeah, it's super cool, and that allows you. That's how Active Job lets you get a database record instead of like Chris was saying in Sidekick, just an ID, and then it can 15 minutes later, whenever your job runs, take that, get your instances. It's really cool.
Yeah,
So that's what I was using to form my actual Redis keys was
that's
the
cool.
global ID.
That's a good idea. Yeah, because these are like the use of this. You probably have used it, but not you didn't know it. Because it's transparent in Rails. I think it's its own separate thing because you don't have to. Well, no, it looks like it adds the record to your active record model, so you can call to global ID on it. So it's got to have a active record, or maybe it's an active model integration or whatever that it adds itself in there. But yeah, it's pretty cool, and I'm sure if you look into the source code for it, it's like really probably pretty short. I can't imagine it's too complex. But I think they do signed IDs too, so that you can verify they haven't been tampered with and all that good stuff.
Yeah, is that you?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's my doorbell thing.
That's what I thought. I was like, we don't have like wind chimes here.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I have a Ring doorbell, and so when it sees a car drive by, which I don't care about, it will ring the chime because it sees movement, and then yeah, it just is it's a well-intentioned device, but because I have the battery-powered one, the camera takes too long to turn on from motion. You don't actually get to see what went by and what moved, which is
so can you actually just disable that?
you can set different zones, and you can disable it, and you can have it um, try and only detect motion within like 10 or 15 feet or something. But from what I can tell, it still picks up the cars driving by. But sometimes it won't, and it just is kind of inconsistent. Here it's gonna go again, or not. Here we go. Yep, just gonna ignore that truck go by. All right. See, there you go. That's how inconsistent it is. That's
We bought a Ring doorbell, but the problem with our front door is we have like two front doors.
right. Yeah, you've got like a little screen door or whatever up front, right? Something like that.
Right. And it's not like most time when you have like a screen door, it's connected like right in front of the like front door or back door. But this one's like an entryway. And so it's like, where do you put the camera? Like, because sometimes people use the glass door, sometimes they come on in. Like,
Yeah, and if
so I
they
just
walked on in, then they wouldn't. They'd have to walk back out to find the doorbell, and that'd be weird. And yeah,
yeah, or like, do you get two Ring doorbells? Because there's actually a doorbell at each. spot.
Oh yeah, I guess you could. You could buy
But
mine.
that's
I
like,
hate mine.
I don't want to spend that much money. So
Dude, they're expensive. And yeah, like I got the doorbell that's battery powered because my house isn't wired for a doorbell. And so that has to take batteries. So then you got to buy extra batteries. But my neighbors have been changing theirs. They have the same one, changing their battery like once a week. And I actually they have there it goes again. I have a mount that has solar panels around the top and the sides, and I've never changed the battery since I installed it like several months ago. And there's enough sunlight that it catches that it charges the battery, and it's always above 70% battery, which is kind of
that's
cool. Like I thought that was pretty genius. So
yeah, that rules.
yeah. Um, I wanted to. I mean, we probably haven't talked about this a whole lot on the podcast, but I know you and I have talked, and I haven't updated you on some stuff that I was working on this week. So I was going to mention, we've used or talked about using Tailwind a lot in our Rails apps to style our apps. For anyone that's not familiar, Tailwind is a utility-based CSS framework. So if you're used to Bootstrap or Foundation or any of those, they give you components that you can work with. And those components are like cards, modals, lists, forms, all these things. But they're higher level. And so then oftentimes you need to add a little padding here and there. You want to make this word bold or something, or change the font color, all these little nuanced things to make your custom design so it doesn't look like Bootstrap. Well, Tailwind's set up so that you can do this all sort of from scratch. So you can extract out using these little CSS utilities. You put those together and add like 10 classes to your HTML. And then if you want to, you can extract those out and create your own button classes. So you can make it all from scratch. And the benefit of that is your site's going to look exactly like you want it. And you won't be trying to hack Bootstrap to look like you want it. Because oftentimes you don't theme like the alerts or something in Bootstrap, and you can blatantly tell that they're left over from Bootstrap and someone didn't override those. So anyways, this Tailwind framework doesn't have any JavaScript. And so you can't do a few things that are pretty crucial in a CSS framework, which is dropdowns, tabs, modals, that sort of thing. And Bootstrap and Foundation and all that come with libraries for that, which is great. Tailwind's just focused on the CSS. So what I've been doing lately is building out a few stimulus controllers to handle all that for us, which is really cool. So I built a little position fixed modal. You click on a link, it's a data action in a stimulus controller that grabs the target for the modal itself, which is the background overlay that goes 100%. And then it centers the modal in the middle and all that. And it works awesome. So you have full flexibility to design your modal however you want with the Tailwind classes. And the stimulus stuff is just like, yo, whatever link you want to click to open the modal, just add this action to it. And then add this target to the modal's background. And you can redesign it however you want with your Tailwind classes, which is neat. And so last night I was working on that because modals suck. If you do a position fixed and you have a modal show up, you want to disable scrolling in the background because otherwise it's weird. And so disabling scrolling in the background hides the scroll bar in your browser. So then your whole page shifts, at least on a Mac, 15 pixels, but it probably shifts a different amount, different width on Windows or Linux or whatever, because their scroll bars are different widths. And so then you have to go and calculate the width of the scroll bar using some weird, there's various different ways of calculating that in CSS and JavaScript in weird ways. So you find one of those that works, and then you calculate that, and then as you open the modal and you disable scrolling, you have to add a like padding right to the body that's the same width as the scroll bar, so when it disappears your page doesn't shift over. And I've never noticed that in Bootstrap because I've never tried to build a modal before. But I thought that was hilarious that you have to go like do that because, the scroll bar and all these little nuances start to creep up when you build the base modal stuff. And you're like, oh, yeah, we got it working. And then you find out there's all these little bugs you got to fix like that and work on. Um, I was kind of getting annoyed last night working on that, but I did get it fixed, at least on my computer on Chrome. So I probably need to go do some cross browser and operating system testing for that.
So I love web development so much, but I think back to like my Visual Basic class in community college and how cool it was that like I just grab an element, double click it, and wire it up.
Oh yeah, like drag and drop buttons onto your UI editor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love web development. I would trade it for a lot of things, but for the most part, I wouldn't trade it. And sometimes I'm like, man, that was so simple and so neat. Sure, I'm sure it had its own problems, but
yeah, I used to do that, and I did a little bit of that in Visual Studio, but I actually spent more time using GTK, which is like the open source Linux window creation thingy. I forget what you exactly call it, but it's like it allows you to design windows and stuff on Linux, but there's other things out there for that. But that one, on Visual Studio, when you click on a button and you drag it over, like it just stays the size that it looks. With GTK, it actually expands to whatever size, and so you have to actually add these layout things into it to make sure that because naturally the way the problems that you will see in the Visual Studio stuff, and you may have noticed this, is if you resize the window, the button stays the same size, it doesn't grow or anything when you resize the window. And so in the Visual Studio stuff, it was kind of treated like it's an afterthought that people would resize windows. And then with GTK's approach, it was the opposite, where by default, everything like grew with the window, but then they would just leave you with these ridiculous button sizes and they'd get really tall or really, really wide. And I remember doing that when I was like, I haven't done this for 10 years or whatever. Like this is one of the first things I was trying to do as a programmer in high school. And I was like, what? This is ridiculous. Like I can't make anything that looks nice on the desktop. And then if I run this on Linux or Mac or Windows, like they all look completely different, even though it's the same GTK app on each one. I was like going mad with that. And that's when I got into web development and was like, oh, everything's reasonably consistent between browsers and between operating systems. This is amazing. But yeah, on that Tailwind stuff, I plan on releasing a set of stimulus controllers as a node package that you'll be able to add to your Rails app and Webpacker, and then give Tailwind some interactivity with very little work, hopefully, which would be cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's another project. I don't even know if I told you about this one. Tailwind is huge because it generates like all these classes you may or may not use. Like Bootstrap's not small by any means, but Tailwind is quite a bit larger because it creates, for every color you add, it adds like 30 or some classes for backgrounds, foreground colors, all the border colors, whatever. So it adds a lot of classes every color you add. And to make it more performant, you can strip out the colors you don't need, but you have to then know exactly which colors you're using. And then you get all these other classes too you probably need to strip out for production. So I was fiddling with, maybe 2 weeks ago, on the weekend, I was fiddling with this idea of what if we created a Rails middleware that would parse the response from Rails and pull out all of the CSS classes that you added in your HTML and create a whitelist. And then we could plug in purge CSS with that whitelist. So then when your assets get compiled, it would strip out all of the classes that you didn't use. So the reason we need that middleware is in development, we could watch every single class, because classes are going to come from your HTML templates, of course, but oftentimes you've got helpers that add classes dynamically, or maybe you have a model and you add a class dynamically from the model or something crazy. You can't really search your code and find all the classes that you're going to add in your HTML. So the rack middleware that I built will actually monitor the HTML response of every Rails request and pull out the classes and save them to a JSON file, which gets loaded as the whitelist for purge CSS. So then when it recompiles your assets, Tailwind becomes like, a teeny tiny version of what it is. And it's only the classes you used from it, which is really cool. There's a bunch of other things I have to do to make this like perfect, because if you do anything with Vue or React or Stimulus or whatever, your JavaScript's going to be adding classes as well. So I need to go and grab those out and make those part of it. But that's more of a thing that Purge CSS already does. Is it's pretty good about ripping out classes that you might add from React or Vue or whatever. So if you give it those templates to search, it can come up with a list pretty well. So I'm hoping that I can get a little bit more time to work on that sometime soon, because that would make working with Tailwind, at least in production, like really killer, because you could strip it down and make it exactly what you need. The only trick is you've got to be working on this, or you got to have this pretty much installed from the beginning so it can monitor every class that you have added. Because the worst thing would be to deploy to production and then just have it strip out too many classes, and then your website looks completely ridiculous because you're missing some CSS. But yeah, that's something I've been working on, which I think will be really cool if I can make it, or if I can finish it. But if anybody's interested in that, I've got a repo on my GitHub account called Superleggera, which is I thought a good name, because when you buy if you buy a regular Lamborghini, you get air conditioning and all this. But if you buy the Superleggera version, it costs more and it comes with less stuff because it's faster and more lightweight. And so Superleggera is kind of, you buy your Tailwind, but then if you want it to be the Superleggera version, it comes with less stuff in production and it's faster.
Sounds like your Mini Cooper.
Yeah, man. Yep. So
less seats,
right?
Fast as heck.
Yeah, you don't need passengers. You just need a helmet and obviously a closed course to be a safe driver.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah. So we'll see on those. They're not that I need extra projects to work on or anything, but Tailwind's great, but you've got to go reinvent the wheel a little bit on drop downs and things. And I was like, no, I don't want to depend on Vue or something. And Stimulus is really, really lightweight. So I figured Stimulus controllers for that would be pretty solid. So those I'm excited about releasing, and they're, I think, pretty close. And actually Sam Saffron, is he the one that was the Sam Stevenson? I always get them confused. Yes, Sam Stevenson. He emailed me about the Tailwind controllers that I'm working on, because he's working on trying to figure out a better way or an easier way for Stimulus like 1.1 to allow you to modify classes on your targets in your Stimulus controllers. I don't really know. I can't imagine a really great way to make that seamless, but I'm excited to see what ideas he has in mind, because my controllers are really simple. It's like I have an option, and you can give it a list of classes, and then you can go and add them or remove them from whatever targets you want pretty easily. So if they can improve that code, then that would be fantastic. So looking forward to that. Stimulus has been great. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, man, I hate to run, but I have things to do and an Apple Watch to pick up here in a little bit.
Yeah, you're abandoning us all just for this Apple Watch thing.
I know. I had the Apple Watch on my desk is a Series 0. So I figure.
Was that the original series number then?
The very original. So I figure Series 4 is a decent time to upgrade.
Yeah, this new one looks killer, man. So yeah, now you can get notifications and get distracted on your watch 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I'll probably turn off all notifications and mostly use it for all the health stuff.
Yeah. That seems really good with that EKG monitor and everything that they added. Stuff's awesome.
Yeah, I figure it's worth it. Even if I turned off everything, like that health stuff's just insane. So.
Yeah, they're really good at that. That's a big selling point for them. I was even a little tempted, even though I hate wearing watches. So anyways, yeah, we will catch up with you guys next week, hopefully, unless there's a baby in the way. But, maybe if we want to have baby's first podcast,
Maybe.
Anyways, yeah, I'll let you go, and we will catch up with everybody next week. If you want to follow us, where can they find us, Jason?
Remote_Ruby is the official Twitter for the podcast. I am JM Charnes on Twitter.
EXCID3, Exid3 on Twitter, or Gmail, or pretty much wherever else you can find it.
Yeah, I wanted to be Jason Charnes on Twitter 10 years ago, but somebody beat me to it and has not tweeted in 10 years.
I think that's a valid excuse to brute force their password.
Yeah, I've thought about that, or like even on Twitter, but I'm so tied to JM Charnes on Twitter now that not worth it.
Yeah. All right. We'll catch you guys.
Cool, man. Have a good week.